Yes, you and I, we are different. I have brown skin and brown eyes. I have a scarf on my head. I'm covered nearly head to toe. I am a woman. You might be a man. I have a Canadian accent that maybe sounds a bit different than your own accent. Maybe it sounds a lot different than your accent. Our differences are very real, and they're here for a reason. When we forget the reason for why we are different, we enter into great loss. God tells us in the Quran, chapter 49, verse 13, "O mankind, indeed, we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another." If this is what God is telling us, that this is why I have made you different, I have made you different so that you may get to know one another, then why? Why do we make our differences a reason, a justification even, to keep away from one another? Today we are talking about relating beyond our circles. You know, we all have circles, circles of ethnicity, circles of faith, circles of political ideology. We identify with these circles. And the word relate in this conversation of relating beyond our circles is very important because it means we're able to feel common with someone who is different than us. And that says something about our unity as mankind. In my opinion, an integral part of our unity is that we are different. We have to be different in order for there to be a reason to unite. And in this manner, our differences are incredibly beautiful because they are a sign. They are a reminder of our Lord. Joining us today to speak about relating beyond our circles is Hira Khan. Hira is the creator and founder of Birthkeeper, providing doula services in the Toronto area and prenatal education to the global Muslim community since 2009. Assalamu alaikum, Hira.
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here with us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be on your show.
Yeah. So we have a quote for you. The quote is, "I am convinced that different people bring out different sides of you." Do you believe what this quote is saying is true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I look to my life and to the journey that I've gone through to become the doula and an author and all of the great things, alhamdulillah, that I've accomplished, I think of each person that I've met, like even yourself, as a piece to the puzzle of my life story. Mm-hmm. And when you look at your life like a big puzzle, you realize that sometimes there's like these pieces that are hard to fit. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's pieces that fit in just perfectly and they were absolutely meant to be there. And other times you don't know where the piece belongs. Mm-hmm. And so I often look at, people I meet throughout my journey as just different parts of the puzzle to my life story.
Wow. Mm-hmm. You're a doula, which is also known as a birth companion. Do you want to quickly explain what a doula does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a doula for nearing 10 years, alhamdulillah. So when I first became a doula, I thought of it as a very sort of technical, technical work. Like I'm just here to be a birth coach and just kind of, stick to my resources and stay within a certain context. Mm. But as the years went on, that definition has really expanded for me. Mm. And so what is a doula? A doula is a resource. A doula is a person who's trained in birth coaching. Mm. A doula can be a friend. A doula can be so many, we wear so many different hats in our role, but really what I'm there to do is help facilitate prenatally, whatever that may look like for a certain family, to help facilitate how a woman would want her labor and delivery to go, and then to be there for the family as a collective during the postpartum period. So doulas can wear many different hats, but primarily we are there to be, resourceful, knowledgeable, trained birth support.
Okay. So we're talking about finding what's common with people beyond our circles. You know, and I mentioned we have circles of ethnicity, circles of faith, circles of political ideology, and more. You know, but this isn't so simple, right? There are fears, there is hesitance, there is reluctance when faced with the decision of whether we should or should not establish a relationship with someone who is different than us. You know, we wonder if you felt this in your career. So do you, you know, would you say your career has been affected by your own reluctance or other communities' reluctance to work with people who are different?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, thank you for asking such an important, vital question. And, you know, this question really sort of got me thinking. And I think it's so important to work with communities outside of yourself for so many different reasons. One of them being that, you know, there's so much to learn, and you can only learn so much when you're, you know, trying to limit yourself into a small space. So one of the best things I did, not only individually, but for my career, was actually to work outside of my community. And this was great, and there was so many beautiful fruits that came of that. And an example I'll give you is that when I was working primarily only in the Muslim community, I didn't have access to many resources. I was kind of a one-man show or a one-woman show. And then when I started branching outside, there was so much more doors that opened up. And one of the great things I was able to focus on through, you know, just being more open-minded was actually focusing on cultural sensitivity. And so helping people actually to understand, you know, how to be culturally sensitive when it came to Islam or when it came to Muslims. But at the same time, it forced me, although, you know, I wouldn't say forced, but it really encouraged me to feel the same way, you know, towards other communities. And so I think when you broaden yourself up, you're just able to reach so much more people, so many more populations. Your reach goes from like a foot to, you know, thousands of feet. And you just get so much more traction that way. So that really helped me a lot to just sort of reach outside of the community. And then one thing I realized just sort of organically throughout this process was that, like, even in life, sometimes we want to always surround ourselves with like-minded people. And I've just kind of taken, you know, I'm in my 30s, early 30s now, but alhamdulillah. But I've really taken that pressure off myself and just focused on, you know, I want to hang out with people I like and people I have, you know, things in common with, and not just only focus on, you know, similarities and we have to like the same things. And you know what, if she's a good person and I'm a good person, then that's more than enough reason for me to consider being friends with someone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your work gives you the opportunity to be a part of various families' lives, including families that are different than your own. So have you had an experience in your work that helped you expand your perspective about different kinds of people? And it seems like you have, but you know, like, have you had transformative moments? For example, moments when you caught Hera in the past who had beliefs about certain kinds of people, realizing that somewhere she had been wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the beautiful part about growing up, isn't it? And then, you know, I use the word journey, and I don't use it lightly because it truly was a journey. And through the journey, you make some wrong turns and you wish you could go back and do it again, and or you learn from it and travel differently, you know, the second time around. So absolutely, I can think back to situations where, you know, I would maybe limited myself to the type of families I was open to working with, especially really early in my career, only because I didn't really know better. I was quite young, and I had just been in kind of a sheltered community. And once I was kind of out there and I started, you know, specifically like traveling internationally, that really opened my eyes. Global travel is just so enlightening, all over the world. But specifically, I actually had traveled to the US to a communal farm community that is very well known for the midwifery center. So I was going to, you know, learn birth with these sort of iconic women who were hippies in their 70s, and had I just been lost in my old way of thinking, I'd never be open to that, and it would have been an absolute missed opportunity for me. Now, when I got to this community, you know, it was such a blessing, and I just learned so much. And one of the women I met there is one of my mentors. Her name is Salama Abdullah, and she's actually a Muslim midwife. You know, so it's so interesting. Had I closed myself off to that, I would have never met her. And her specifically, she has a background of being in the Nation of Islam and then coming to Sunni Islam, during the Malcolm X years.
Wow.
So it was an absolute privilege of my life to have met her. And had I closed myself off to that opportunity, then I would have never been able to learn from her wisdom and guidance.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what has being a doula taught you about people who are different than you? And how has it allowed you to relate with people beyond your circles? And again, by this we mean feel common with people, although they are different, and even feel a sense of unity with these people who are different.
So with birth work, the beauty of it is that everyone can relate to that. Everyone knows someone who's given birth or has their, everyone has their own birth story really. So I feel that, absolutely having that as a front and foremost center of, all of my interactions, I just kind of remind myself when I'm with clients or I'm working out, in the midwifery community with different midwives or and meeting other birth workers, I just remind myself that, the one thing we have in common is actually birth. And so I think we have to focus on the similarities. There are times where I've been in situations where, I've caught myself, what you're saying, I've caught myself maybe in really uncomfortable situations, but I just try to remember to focus on, the similarity and why we're all kind of there and what kind of unifies us, and it always comes back to birth. So I think if you just try to focus on, the one thing, as simple as it sounds, just human connection, it can go such a long way.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, so we're just going to take a short break. We'll be back after the break to talk more with Hira Khan about relating beyond our circles. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the My Voice show on EOS with your host Aisha Heather. Before the break, we were speaking with Hira Khan, who's a doula, and we're speaking about finding what's common with people who are different than us. So Hira, I can see why we choose to stay within the comfort of our direct circles, right? The circles or the people that we identify with or the ideas that we identify with. And I can even see some benefits in doing that. But what is the loss that we incur as mankind when we choose to stay within the comfort of our direct circles?
Yeah, this question's really dear to my heart for so many reasons. So there's actually an activist named Holly Near who wrote some really beautiful lyrics.
Holly
Near.
Near.
Yeah, so she said, "I'm willing and I'm open, for to be hopeless would be so strange. It dishonors those who come before us, but lift me up to be the light of change." And I still think about all of our ancestors and the people who, fought to bring change and to break barriers. And when I catch myself or anyone else I know kind of falling back into history, I have to ask myself, what have we changed as a people? And how can we kind of move forward and live up to honoring all those people who, sacrificed their voices to be heard for us, right? So if we think to figures like Muhammad Ali or to Malcolm X, if they never stepped outside of their circles, I mean, how would change come, right? So that's when I have to ask myself, maybe it makes me uncomfortable. Maybe I'm not that confident initially, but I have to do the little gestures. I have to do the little things that are going to make space for my community. And alhamdulillah, like I said, I've been working almost a decade now. The little things pay off. And now I'm at a space where I'm working besides other Muslimas in my field, and we're bringing change, and we're so welcomed because we speak the language, we understand the cultural sensitivity, we're educated, we're bright, we have so much to offer, right? But if we stay within our sheltered communities, change can never come.
Yeah. And would you say there is a gap between the Muslim community and other communities, that we try to ignore or even purposely maintain. And I think we also need to keep in mind that there are circles within the Muslim community
Absolutely.
too, and then perhaps gaps between those. So what do you think creates these gaps?
Yeah. So absolutely, I agree with you that I think some of the most challenging gaps are within our own community ourselves. I mean, it's no secret that we have several masajids and they just can't seem to agree. We can't even seem to agree on when Eid is, you know? So, you know, there's a lot of differences, and I think that, you know, the differences will always be there, but like I said earlier, that we have to sort of focus on the solutions, and we have to now really start thinking about, you know, what are we leaving behind for this new generation? So much of my work is with newborns, and I can't help but think, you know, what kind of world are they going to come into? How welcomed are they going to feel? Are they going to feel connected even within their own people? I mean, these are genuine concerns that I have as a mother and as someone who's constantly helping, you know, like help life come into this world. I can't help but think, well, how is the world? And so I think it's our absolute social responsibility on each and every one of us to maybe just do a little more, or go outside of our comfort box, or you know, our and definitely work outside of our community. And it really comes down to something really simple, in my opinion, is just having really good manners with one another. So, you know, taking care of your neighbor, taking care of your colleagues, and just kind of educating them a little bit about you. And then above all, which I think would be the most challenging thing for our community, is to be nice to the communities within our communities that we don't agree with. You know, and that's when you can get into like the Shia, the Sunni, the Ahmadi, like, you know, and it's unfortunate because if we were all to be in a room and never ask each other, you know, those, if we don't start with the question, what's your faith, I think we'd find so much more in common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so do you think what creates those gaps is then a fear, or like what do you think it is?
You know, I think it's fear. I think it's also a lot of cultural baggage. Like maybe our parents were a certain way, or our grandparents were a certain way, and we think we have to somehow reason carry that forward. But I think what we forget is, you know, myself included, I was born in Canada, and although I've gone back home to Pakistan and visited a few times, I kind of feel like I can relate more to the Canadian way of life, because I've lived here my whole life. I don't know anything else. I've never lived in Pakistan, but I can still go home to Pakistan and feel totally patriotic and love the country and love the sacrifices that my ancestors and grandparents gave. But I'm in a pickle because you know, Canada feels more like home for me. And so I think, you know, those are the challenges that our generation and the generations after us are going to be facing, where we're not going to understand the cultural sensitivities the same way our parents' generation has. So I think it has a lot to do with fear. I think it has a lot to do with almost like a lack of motivation to really put ourselves out there. And I don't really blame people, because sometimes we put ourselves out there and, you know, it doesn't work out, or it doesn't go as planned. But then I always say, you have to just keep going. You can't give up. And like I said earlier, the example of like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, or, you know, all these great people, the movers and shakers, I mean, they never gave up, right? They kept going. And so you plant a seed and you water it, and then you give it sunlight, and then you give it air, and then you give it love, and then it grows and blossoms into something beautiful. But you can't put the seed in and forget about it, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Well, you already mentioned some ways that the Muslim community can go about and engage with other communities. I think you mentioned, you know, just being kind even to the people that are within the community that we may have differences with. So I guess, like, what is your advice to the Muslim community? If you could give them a piece of advice on what they can do so that they are engaging with people who are different than them, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I am the Muslim community, so my advice to myself, firstly to myself, is, you know, don't pass so much judgment. You know, I sometimes catch myself like, oh, why is that person doing this, and why, you know, it's unfortunate they're not doing it this way. And something I've just learned over time and with maturing and evolving as, you know, a woman myself, like from a girl to a lady to a woman, is just, you know, don't pass judgment. You never know what another person is going through, and rather look to them more with empathy and try and understand that there's some people in our community are going through lots of hardships. You know, and we make so much judgment sometimes without trying to fully understand what their story is. You know, that piece of the puzzle I was talking about. You know, maybe they have an incomplete puzzle. Maybe, you know, there's more to it than we know. There's always more to it than that meets the eye. And so I just remind myself and the community to just be more compassionate, be more open-minded, be more welcoming and less judgmental, and stop having those difficult conversations with one another. You know, start with something you have in common. Yeah.
So then, yeah, start with something that you have in common. That's very beautiful. I'm wondering, like, what would you start with?
Well, anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we now in the age we live in, I mean, there's so many topics to discuss, and I just think that, you know, I found myself in the past in these kind of debatable, difficult conversations, and I kind of asked myself, like, how did I end up in that conversation? And so now I just catch myself. And so if someone's trying to talk to me about something that is very controversial or, you know, debatable, or that's going to cause a divide between the community, I'll just try to direct the conversation somewhere else and try to focus first on what we have in common. Then when we've established that we have a good understanding, or that you know, we're at least communicating nicely with one another, then we can have that talk. But if you go out and start at like a level 10 conversation, then it's going to be heated, then it's going to cause divide. And what's the purpose of that? So with everything, we have to go back to what's our intention, what's our purpose. And so I think if you just scale back and focus into like, oh, well, how was your day? And so what are you up to? And instead of starting like, what is your opinion on, you know, I don't know, Muslim rights? And just diving into that. It's really taking the time out, slowing down, making intentions, and getting to know each other first before any of those conversations.
And we can get into like heated conversations where we are yelling, and it's important for us to be able to know how to have like healthy disagreements, or have a healthy conversation with someone who thinks differently than us, right? Like, how do we, versus being heated and yelling, remain calm and, you know, remain respectful towards that other person who thinks differently than us. So yeah, I guess one way to do that is to start somewhere where, you know, it's not going to get all the way to like...
Start on mutual ground. And one of my really good teachers always reminded us to just be a good listener first. Oftentimes we're speaking before we're listening, and when we're listening, we're still speaking in our mind.
That's so true.
So it's like catch yourself and actually listen and actually try and hear and be compassionate, empathetic towards what that person's saying. And being empathetic and compassionate doesn't mean we have to agree. So that's something that I've learned. And one of my teachers, like I said, she always talked about listening first.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Hera. Would you like to leave the viewers with a resource where they can follow your work? Is there something you'd like to say to them?
So thank you so much, Aisha, for having me on the show. It's such a privilege, and seeing Muslims like you doing the work that our community so badly needs. I'm so inspired by you, because when I was younger growing up, we didn't have these kind of resources. So thank you so much for what you do. And to the viewers, you can go and learn more about me on my website, www.birthkeeper.com. You can read more into, you know, the work I'm doing and the book I've written. I've written a children's Islamic birth book called A Gift from Jannah, and you can order it from there as well.
And thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, for having me.
And for your writing. Like, I love to write, so I love meeting writers.
Maybe we can write something together.
Yeah, why not? Absolutely. All right. Okay. Thank you to all of you. Next week is actually going to be our final conversation on the My Voice show of the first season, and it's going to be my final conversation hosting on the My Voice show. So I would like to thank you. I was very afraid, and I still am at times. You know, I have 25 to 30 minutes of your day, and I want to make sure that I'm doing justice, and I know that I've made mistakes, so I ask you to forgive me for the mistakes that I've made. And I also just ask you to please remember me in your prayers, that wherever Aisha goes, that God keeps her on his path, on the straight path, that she be doing good wherever she goes, and I will remember you. We still have some time together though. Next week, our final conversation of the first season. Please remember to join. Thank you and take care. The My Voice team at the EOS studio.